Brandon Brockmyer is the Director of Research at the Project on Government Oversight. He oversees a team of investigators and analysts who take a data-driven approach to identifying government waste, corruption, and abuse. He also manages POGO's editorial and fact-checking process and helps oversees its FOIA program. Before going to POGO, he worked as a research director for the New Venture Fund's Western Values Project, overseeing investigations that landed in outlets such as the Post, the Wall Street Journal, and the New York Times. Until 2018, he served as research director for the U.S. government watchdog group Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, or CREW. And he holds a PhD in international relations from American University, an MA in psychology from New York University, and his undergrad degree from Reed College. He's going to talk about POGO's COVID tracker projects, and it is now 12:15, and we have him until 1:15, so I'll turn it over to Brandon.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks everybody for having me today. As Chris mentioned, I'm Brandon Brockmyer. I'm the research director at POGO. I lead POGO's efforts to monitor federal COVID relief spending and curate that data for investigators like yourselves, for policy analysts, and for the public. A little bit about POGO, and then I'll dive into the tracker itself. POGO, for those of you who don't know, is an independent, nonpartisan watchdog organization that investigates waste and corruption and abuse of power in the US and champions reforms to achieve a more effective, ethical, and accountable federal government. We focus our efforts on areas of government that are most vulnerable to corruption due to the large amounts of money involved. So that would include defense and arms sales, pharmaceuticals, financial services, public procurement, and the extractive industries. We craft and advocate policy reforms to address the systemic weaknesses that the investigations find. So it's sort of a two-pronged approach. There's the investigation side of POGO, and then there's the policy reform. For COVID relief spending, that's meant focusing both on oversight gaps that can lead to waste and fraud, and also to the issues around equity in the spending. And hopefully I can talk a little bit about both of those today. In September 2020, POGO launched our COVID-19 relief spending tracker, which you can find online at covidtracker, all one word, .pogo.org. The database is up to date as of Q1 of 2021. And so it right now includes more than 20 million individual spending transactions, accounting for 1.8 trillion in assistance spending and 46.3 billion in government contracts. The web tool includes an industry by industry spending breakdown and a mapping feature that allows users to examine spending at the state, county, and zip code levels. Additional data on demographics and unemployment statistics at these levels helps users to put all that spending in context. So I'll start today by showing you how the tracker is organized and navigated, walk you through some of the steps for using it to begin investigating questions around waste and fraud and also around equity. You should have slides either now or shortly that you can refer back to on this, but for today, I'm going to actually switch over to the live site because I think it could be useful. Okay, hopefully everyone can see the live site here. Great. Okay, so this is the landing page for the site, and I'll just point out a few features here. So what you're looking at right now is a 50-state map of total spending. Darker colors means more spending, lighter colors means less. There's a legend along the bottom. And you can break out the spending by spending types, really broad spending types. So you can see if I click on these left-hand filters, it's going to change the map. If you click on the states themselves, you're going to get a pop-up box, which gives a little bit more information about each state. So here you're going to see the per capita amounts. It's also worth noting this is responsive to these left-hand filters. So if you're looking at overall, you'll see overall spending in the pop-up. If you're looking at direct payments or loans, you'll see those for the states. You'll see the total number of transactions we've been able to track, and you'll see the demographics. So again, this is all state level data, and as we dive further into the site, you'll see that we have county and zip data as well. The landing page packs quite a bit in just at the state level. The other feature on the landing page I want to point out is these overlays over on the right-hand side. So you've got unemployment data for states. This is current as of January 2021, population and minority population percentage. And again, the point of these overlays is really to just sort of start the user getting familiar with combining the spending data with indicators of community need. In terms of navigating the site, a couple of things to know. The navigation is largely along the top. You can dive right into the data by using the search bar here. It's a geographic search bar, so you can type in any county or zip or state, or if you're interested in a state that has boroughs, there'll be boroughs, parishes, it's all there. To navigate to the other parts of the site, you've got a map view, which we'll come back to, table view, and industry overviews. Again, geographic search appears along the top here. You can share the site on social media. You can also copy links for emails. And then lastly, there's this hamburger menu, which has the methodology and the FAQ and a few other things. So let's dive right into the map view. I'm just going to go ahead and use this geographic search bar. And I'm going to go to Texas. And what that's going to do is automatically kick us over to the map view. Map's going to zoom in. And we're going to start looking at some data for Texas. So the default view is going to be whatever the locality you put in is. So in this case, it's a state level view of Texas. And if we look on this left-hand panel, you'll start to see some of the data we've put together. So we've selected Texas. We've got the total amount in spending we're tracking, and then that's broken out by assistance spending and contract spending. We've got this left-hand panel. The first thing you'll see is two scatter plots. One is for unemployment rate mapped against per capita spending, and the other is minority population percentage mapped against per capita. And we're going to spend a lot of time here, so I'll skip over that for now. The next thing you'll see is demographics, and the last thing is the unemployment trend over time. So in most cases, what you'll see here is that unemployment sort of peaked in April and July, and then kind of drifts back down. But these are sort of good, rough, broad measures to get a sense for how, whether or not the money is ending up in the communities most in need. So again, if I come over here and I say we want to look at Harris County, Texas, the map's going to switch over to county view, and the data that's being displayed on the left is now going to be the Harris County data. So now it says Harris County. You'll see it's less spending because we're only looking at that county. And now in the scatter plots, what we're seeing instead of the 50 states is all of the counties in Texas. You can navigate the map either by clicking on these counties in the scatter plot, which will take you to where those counties are in Texas, or you can navigate using the map itself. Again, you'll see there's huge variations in demographics and unemployment rate county by county. And the other thing I'd point out here is you can actually select and deselect ranges of amounts. So let's say you only care about the really highest spending counties, or the counties where there was the most spent. You can zoom in on those. The other thing to know about the map portion of this view is that you've also got different overlays here. So the default is going to be total COVID spending, but we've also put in just assistance spending, just contract spending. This one may be of particular interest to you all is PPP spending, and then per capita spending, which is a great one to look at, equity. There's also unemployment rates mapped out, population, and minority population percentage. Okay. So I'll start by showing you a few ways that you can use the map view to look at equity. So we're going to keep our focus on Texas. Specifically Texas counties. So I'm just going to click on any of these to load the county scatter plot. There we go. All right, so these are all of our Texas counties. So the reason we put these scatter plots together is we thought it would be a useful way to identify outliers. So in the case of Texas, if you look way over here on the far right, you see Borden County. Borden County, Texas has the highest per capita spend of any of the Texas counties. If we look at the pop-up, we can see they got $57.1 thousand per capita. We can take a look at some of the information about that county. It's 89.5% white. And down here at unemployment, we can see that they ticked up a little bit to 3.6%, but dropped right back down to 2.8 by this January. So if you compare that to, say, Edwards County, which is 58.1% Hispanic, also didn't have much unemployment, I should say, in terms of how it changed over time during the pandemic. But you can start sort of comparing individual localities in this way, and you can do the same thing at the zip code level. This isn't unique to Texas, obviously, so I'm going to go back out to the 50-state map. And what you can see if you look at these scatter plots is you can kind of see a rough trend line here. If you take out DC as an outlier, you can see that some of the states that receive the most per capita spending, Idaho, Alaska, North Dakota, Wyoming, Vermont, so this quadrant here, also tend to be fairly low on minority population percentage. Whereas some of the states over here, New Mexico, California, Texas, Hawaii, these are states that have higher minority population percentages and lower per capita spending. We'll do one more example just to show that this can be done in a couple different ways. So here in the DC region, we're going to look at Prince George's County. So the map's going to automatically switch to county view again. It's going to zoom in on Prince George's County. And if we look at the scatter plot, we can see, or at the demographics bar, we can see Prince George's County has minority population percentage of 87%, and spending per capita was about 3.8K. That's about the average, that's the national average per county. If we look down at unemployment, we can see huge jump as the pandemic got going, and then sort of stubbornly staying high, in fact, getting even higher in October to 10.2%. So if we compare that to another DC suburb, we look at Arlington County, Virginia. The scatter plot makes it tricky to see because there's so much clustering, but if we actually click on the dot here, you can see much lower minority population percentage in Arlington, 38.2%. Spending per capita, 6.6K, so almost double what Prince George's County got. And if we look at their unemployment graph, we see that it did tick up to 7%, and then it came back down. So again, there's a lot of things going on here. We don't want to make any broad causal statements. Obviously, there's contract spending to think about. There's spending that we're not able to map to the county and zip level. But this does sort of give you a sense for some really rough ways to start generating hunches around the equity of spending. So moving to table view, this is where investigators can really start diving into individual transactions. So just to give an example of, well, first let me just say a word about navigation. So an important thing to note here is that the assistance and contracts data is separated out, and that's because the data structure is a little bit different for both. So depending on what you're interested in learning about, you'll want to switch this toggle to contracts or assistance. We'll go back to Borden County as just to give an example of how results appear. We've also got a recipient search, which I'll come back to. You can filter down by the type of award here, loans, grants, direct payments. You can filter by industry, and this is based on the 2-digit NAICS codes. You can select a specific agency, and you can select a specific program. Now, there's a lot of programs and a lot of agencies, so these are all text entry friendly. So you can just put in PPP, you'll get the PPP loan. You can put in EADL, and get the EADL loan. In this case, we're just going to do a general search for Borden County just to sort of see what comes up. We click apply, and we can see right away here, if we sort the results, we see there's a handful of really big PPP loans in Borden County that help to start explain why they're the highest per capita spending in Texas. You can sort by any of the columns here. You can also customize your view. So if there's columns you're not interested in or other columns you want to look at, that's all available here. And then lastly, once you have a search that you're really interested in, you can download the data here. You can also share search results. So right up here, again, you can share on social media, you can send as an email, or you can just copy a link. And the cool thing about this share feature is it will keep all the filters you've put in place. So if you have a very specific filter for a recipient or a zip code, and you filtered it by industry and program and all of that will carry over if you do the share. So that is the general search view. Once you find a transaction you're really interested in, you can click on this magnifying glass and it takes you into the transaction details. This is where we've pulled in all the data we've been able to capture from the various government sources. So some of it's pretty obvious. There's program name, recipient name, but as you get into the weeds, you're going to have additional data. So DUNS numbers, if they're applicable, congressional district, information about the award. And recently we were able to pull in additional data from the SBA to the PPP loan section, if you're looking at PPP loan data. So a couple of interesting things here that are worth pointing out. We do have the lender information here now, and we also have the fields for whether the business owner answered the questions on ethnicity, gender, and veteran status. It is worth noting that 90% of loan recipients did not answer those questions. So a real challenge there in terms of looking at equity issues.
Brandon, if I could ask a question,
Please.
The lenders, are those uniformly filled out, or is that also scattershot?
That's better. That data is better because that had to be, the loans were processed by the lenders, so that information tends to be there. Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
And one of the enhancements we're looking at for the site for the next update is to make the lender information searchable and filterable, because right now it's just appearing in individual transactions.
And the job supported number, what's the definition of what people are supposed to be filling in on the job supported number?
That is a great question. There was a lot of confusion in the PPP program about what that number was supposed to be and what it meant. And we're finding that as businesses are going back for their second or even third PPP loans, they're putting in very different numbers than they were in the first case. It's supposed to be the number of people on payroll that the loan is going to support. But in reality, people were putting in ones, zeros, people were putting in their total payroll. So it's really all over the map. It is not very accurate data. It's getting better over time, but what you can say about it now is this is the number that was reported to the SBA and to the lender when the business applied for the loan.
I mean, do you think if a reporter were to look at what the job supported number was during the first round of a PPP loan and then during the second round, and if they find a big discrepancy, could that be an indication of some funny business, or is that just kind of confusion over the reporting requirements?
I think it could certainly be worth making some calls and asking some questions about that. I think the challenge is the loans were processed so quickly, and there was no process set up for sort of auditing any of the information. There wasn't a whole lot of clarity around what the numbers were. So it could mean a lot of different things. But it does mean if you are seeing the same business get two loans and they're reporting two different numbers, something happened for sure. And it may be that they got a better understanding of the rules. But if you saw, I think what we've seen so far is numbers that were reported as like ones or twos and now are being reported as like 200, right? And I think in those cases, what it is the data either wasn't being recorded correctly in the first instance, or they really didn't understand what that field was for. But I do think it is a way to kind of start generating some hundreds for sure.
Okay. We do have a couple of questions in chat here. Could we just grab those real quick?
Yeah, we can take those now, sure.
So Lynn, if you could ask your question, and then Danielle.
Hi, I'm Lynn with Colorado Public Radio. I was just curious if you expect the restaurant revitalization fund data to be included in this when it comes out.
It would depend. I would say probably. I can get into some of the sources of the data we're using, but in general, if it goes into USA spending, we would definitely include it here if there's a way to kind of identify it as COVID related. One of the challenges we've seen is there is a national action code that's supposed to tag all COVID spending. It's not been especially well applied. And so what we've had to do is go outside the national action code and really audit the data to pull in more. We've done that wherever possible, but obviously if it's not in USA spending, there is challenges with matching it up the right way. And I can give examples of that, but there are programs where USA spending will report sort of a block grant to one recipient. We know that that's sort of a pass through, but the sub-recipients are not being reported. And so that makes it tricky to get all of the data in. But yes, we would absolutely do our best to get it in. And you'd find that by looking at the programs here.
Okay, Danielle?
Yeah, I was wondering, I haven't done as much work on this recently, but I know that at the beginning, there were hardly any businesses reporting like the race and ethnicity of the owner. But we were looking at, sort of the share of money that was going to Black and Brown owned businesses. Do you have anywhere on that database or otherwise suggestions in terms of looking at the PPP funding going to minority owned businesses?
Yeah, I wish I had better news in terms of what our options are there. We're very interested in that as well. We've tried to look at the 5% or so of loans where that information was filled out and sort of see what the equity issues may be there. We also know from IG reports that they were also concerned that the loans were not making it to Black and Brown businesses. And because they issued guidance very late in the program saying, this was the congressional intent here. You're not doing enough to make sure that it's getting to recipients. And so I think it's one of those things where it seems pretty well established that there was a problem with the equity of the distribution of loans. In terms of showing that in the data, they didn't collect enough data to really do it at a macro level. We are seeing some improvements, but it's hard to show in the raw numbers at the moment.
Okay, Alex, and then Rachel.
Hi, Alex Lacasse with the Portsmouth Herald up in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. You did a good job explaining why you think that there could have been some confusion on the reporting requirements on the jobs supported from the first round to the second round. And I guess I'm curious about the reverse and if you've seen any kind of widespread instances, I guess on a macro level, about companies they reported a lot of jobs supported the first time around, and on the second time, that number was slashed by some drastic scale.
I can't say for sure what we've seen in the data thus far, because our focus so far has been getting all the data into the tracker. And so our opportunity to do analyses of first batch versus second batch has been pretty limited. I think it's a great idea. I think there probably are really interesting differences between the first round, the second round, and the third round. But my colleagues and I haven't had a chance to really dive into that. One thing that we are interested in and are planning to look at is lenders who helped businesses get these loans got a different service fee depending on the size of the loan. And so we are interested in looking at sort of the clustering of the loans around those breakpoints and seeing if loans were being sort of pushed into the next bracket, if you will. But in terms of the jobs numbers, I think the challenge is the data were just pretty garbagey from the get-go. And so even if you found major differences between round one and round two, it might be hard, other than if you have a hunch on an individual business. There have been stories on sort of, two vineyards in California, right? And one reported 25 jobs and one reported 200, and a reporter went and sort of asked them what was going on. So, I think there are opportunities for sort of small scale stories like that. I think at the macro level, the problem is the SBA had all sorts of problems with the data from the get-go. And so it's harder to say much beyond the data was poor at the macro level.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, Rachel, and fellows, tell them where you're from when you ask a question.
Hi, Rachel Riley with the Everett Daily Herald in Washington. So when I look at the county I cover, obviously the #1 recipient is our local county government, which got around 143 million. Is there like a uniform way to figure out how different cities and counties distributed that money and divvied it up? Like, is there a form they use to report back to the federal government? Just looking for any sort of a shortcut there.
Sure. Yes, I'm glad you asked about that. That is one of those areas where the data structure has made it challenging to get. So the block grants that go to states, we've got entered. In some cases, what we've been able to do for some programs is bring in additional data and say, okay, well, where did it go then, right? It went to the state, where did it go then? The problem with the program you're referring to, I think it's the Coronavirus Relief Fund, is that data is structured separately and it's recorded separately. But the good news is it does exist. And so you can find that. Let me see if I can. I believe that you can find it at the PRAC website. So the PRAC is the Pandemic Response Accountability Committee. I believe they have that data. They're just reporting it separately. So we couldn't combine it with ours for various structural reasons, but you can go into a separate data set and drill down into how the money is being spent at the local level.
Very, very helpful. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, and then Bridget, and then then we'll go back to your presentation because I kind of hijacked it with all these questions right now. So
Oh,
Bridget,
totally fine.
Hi, I'm Bridget Bowman with CQ Roll Call. I was just curious if there's a way to search for spending by congressional district, or if it's not easy, if there's a way that we could try to piece that together.
Yes, so I think the easiest way, I have my wrong screen up, hold on one sec. So I think the easiest way to do that, so we do have that data in here. I think, I just want to make sure I don't give bad information here, but I think what you can do is download the data, and then that will have the congressional district in the data set. So that's one of those features that, over time I'd love to get so that it's native to the site where you could sort and filter, but I think at the moment you'd have to download the data.
Okay, great, thank you.
But so my suggestion would be run as many filters as you can to get a data set that's small and manageable, and then hopefully you'd have that field in there. If it's not in our data download, we can probably provide it to you if you want to get it.
Cool. Thank you.
Any other questions?
not right now. So yeah, back to the
Okay.
show.
Okay. So I wanted to show a few ideas for the kinds of investigations or sort of hunch generation exercises you can use on the tracker. So I'm going to clear out the filter, all the filters in the search. One thing that I think there's been a little bit of writing on, but probably there's more opportunities to do is around franchises, right? So franchises often get around the limits on individual PPP loans or other programs because they're franchised. So you can use our recipient search to type in McDonald's. And what you'll get is all the different McDonald's. So so you can get a sense for how much money is going to a franchised business that in any other way you wouldn't be able to track that. If you have individual companies that you're interested in looking at and you want to see how many different kinds of loans they got, this would be another thing to do. So I'm trying to think of an example. Well, I'll give you one from my So one I noticed the other day here in Maryland, if I look at recipients here in Prince George's County, there's a bunch of recipients with very, very similar names and similar addresses that got multiple PPP loans. And so you can use the recipient search to type in a company you're concerned about and see they may have hit PPP, EDL, they may have gotten contracts, they may have gotten grants. And so using the recipient search is a really good way to get all of that information into one place. Whereas that's going to be much more difficult with any of the other trackers. So that's one thing you can do. I did want to flag this address field too. This is pretty key for looking at possible examples of double or triple dipping. Those aren't necessarily going to be fraud, but they're going to tell you something interesting about where the money is going. So I'll do one more search here. So I can't remember how we first identified this, but there is this zip code in Peoria. And if you look at the results for all the spending that made its way to that county, you find 50 entries for this same address, 830 West Trail Creek Drive. And a lot of them are for the same company. I don't know what this means, but it's very interesting. It's the most spending transactions we've seen go to any single address. It's not a block grant. It's probably some kind of pass-through medical distributor, but I honestly don't know. And there are 50 plus of these transactions for pretty large amounts here. And so there's an opportunity, I think, for local reporters to find these kinds of examples in your towns where you may see an organization double, triple, quadruple dip. That's not against the rules in the CARES Act, but it is something that I know the SBA's IG is looking into. There's just not really a great centralized way to know who has taken advantage of which programs. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity for those kinds of stories at the local level.
Brandon, if I could ask one specific question. Has there been an effort made either by the SBA or USA Spending or you guys to standardize address fields like drive as an abbreviation or not an abbreviation?
There has been no effort by, I think USA Spending is, as part of their standard data cleanup, does a little bit on this, but this is, you've nailed one of the huge challenges here in working with this data. You can see just in this example, huge differences. Sometimes you'll have ink with a comma, sometimes you'll have ink without a comma. Periods are missing, things are spelled out, things are not spelled out. It makes it really hard to know whether you're looking at the same business or different businesses or how many entries. That's why we built this recipient search, to be completely text friendly. I mean, we didn't do any cleanup because if you did, you'd potentially be combining things that shouldn't be combined. But I'll give you one example I know of just off the top of my head is Delta. And you can see all the different ways that Delta has put in its name. You should probably specify airlines, but so anyway, to your point, if you tried to automate some sort of aggregation where you say, go find all the same names and tell me how much they spent overall, you would run into a huge problem because none of this has been standardized. So you're actually better off running searches with sort of broader recipient terms and then looking at the address field and figuring out if these really are the same entities or not.
All right, thanks.
I'll show you the industry overview and then that should do it. And I'm happy to take more questions on the tracker or on some of the projects where we've done thus far. So the industry overviews is a page we've put together that combines the spending data for 2-digit NAICS codes, and that's the North American Industry Classification System. It is worth noting that not all of the spending data has NAICS codes associated with it. So contracts obviously do. And the PPP program does. But there's big chunks of the spending data where they haven't made the industry code available, or in the case of subgrants to states or subrecipients that the states are divvying out, that information just hasn't flowed up. So this is sort of should be taken as sort of a low estimate for spending in each industry. We'll just go into one of these so you can see what it looks like. What you'll get for each industry page is the total spending we've been able to track and the number of transactions. And then if you're interested in a specific state, what you can do here is scroll over any of these states and you'll see the total spend within that state for that industry. And one feature I like here is if you click on Explore the Data, what this is going to do is it's basically going to run this in the table view for you, where it'll say, okay, healthcare sector for Florida. And it'll pull up all those transactions for you. So it's just sort of a quicker way to look at state level data for industries. And then once you've got that search run, if you want to further specify to a city or a county or a zip, or you're interested in a specific program, that's a good way to do it. In this case, I picked Florida and healthcare, and so it's going to run for a long time. So I'll go back, but it would eventually finish searching. On the main industry page, you get a few additional factoids about the spending. So we've broken out total spending by assistance. So you can see here, in this case, in healthcare, this is one of the larger sectors, 301 billion. We've been able to track, it's gone through 8 agencies. You can break it out further. So this is the number of loans, number of direct assistance payments, grants. And then we've also been able to pull in the largest transactions we've seen. And so again, this is a way, if you're interested in a specific industry, you can see who sort of the largest recipients have been. Contracts is organized very much the same way. You can see the total amount spent, and then the largest contract transactions. And again, if you click on any of these show all transactions, it's just going to automatically run those results for you. So in this case, it's going to look at contracts in the healthcare sector. So it's just sort of a faster way. Last thing I will point out is in the hamburger venue, we do have a tip line. And the idea here was, as we get more and more people looking at the data who might come in here and they put in their zip code, or they put in they look for their congressional district, or they put in a business they're just interested in. We wanted them to have a way to get in touch with us so that our investigators can start searching and running down leads. So that is there as well. That is it for the walkthrough of the tracker itself. I'm happy to take additional questions or show any of these features in more detail, or just take general questions on how we put it together.
Okay, so we have a question from David, and then others raise your hands. And I got a couple questions also. So David
Great.
first.
Hi, I'm David Cruz. I'm with Gothamus and WNYC in New York. I'm just curious if there's a way of breaking down the totals even further, simply because I'm kind of curious in seeing like whether or not like any of like the high top level folks ended up getting like a substantial like pay or anything like that. I just kind of want to see where the money actually went beyond the totals.
Yeah, that's a good question. I can show you sort of how I would go about doing that if I were trying to run that. I will say, this is one of the challenges for a project like this. There's sort of the depth and the breadth problem, right? And our goal was to pull together as much spending data into a comparable data set as possible. And what that's meant is diving down kind of has to be left up to the individual user, and that's why we have the data download and we've got the table view set up the way we can. So we haven't done like further breakouts because it would make sense in some places and for some programs and for some questions, but not for others. And so that's why we haven't been able to do that. But what I would do as a starting point on here, if you had a specific county or state you were interested in, so you said New York, right? So let's just do Plymouth County. So there's a couple ways I would approach this depending on what your question is. If you were interested in sort of issues around equity and distribution, I might start in here and I might go into the zip code level and really start, pull up per capita spending. And really start playing around in here and start trying to figure out some of these outliers and things like that. If I were interested in, you mentioned specific individuals. So I think you could either come into the table view and look by recipient, or if you're talking about specific individuals within an industry, what you could do is pull up like finance and insurance, let's say Kings County again. Let's say you are specifically concerned about loans and direct payments. And you could even put in a range if you only cared about really high value payments. And you may even have a hunch on what the agency is, that's giving out loans. So anyway, once you run your results with the appropriate filters, my suggestion would be either continue to try to refine them or just go ahead and download them and sort them as you see fit in Excel to start generating some of that. Now, the other thing you could do is if you sort them on the tracker itself and you want more information, you can just go into the transaction details and try to figure out a little bit more about them. So let's say you see that there's the top 10 largest recipients in your search, and you go in here and you see they all have the same lender, or some other piece of data that sort of helps you move your research along. So there's a couple of ways I could see going after that. Does that help?
Yeah. What just had me think about this question specifically was I saw that the this public hospital system in New York City had received a bunch of PPP.
Oh, right. Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, the hospital is always broke, but I'm kind of curious whether or not their whether their president, CEO, whether or not they managed to sort of keep the salary intact as is. And that's, that to me, that just had me wonder, if there's an even further breakdown of who within these institutions received this kind of money. So that's what I wanted to know.
Yeah, that's okay. That's helpful. So, I mean, what I would maybe say is after you came to the industry page and you notice that, you might want to go back over to the table view and put that hospital in as a recipient and see what comes up. And that might give you some sense for who within that, if it's broken out by organization or individual or into a bunch of different pieces, that would help you see that.
Okay, thank you.
Brandon, I was hoping you could address a slightly different issue, and that's outside of the micro data that we're looking at here. Can you talk a little bit about who's going to be doing the big picture investigating of all this stimulus money? Could you maybe give a quick primer on the IGs, on the
Sure.
GAO, and on PRAC, and on any kind of new entities that we should be watching for reports that they're doing in
Sure.
coming months or years, and which do you think will be the most valuable?
Sure, happy to. So there are a number of oversight bodies that are tasked with looking at various aspects of the COVID spending. You mentioned a handful of them. We already discussed PRAC. So PRAC is the Pandemic Response Accountability Committee. It's within the IG community. They have built a tracker similar to ours, less comprehensive, but very easy to use. They have thus far been really concerned about sort of the data transparency issues. They do have a mandate to do some investigations, but thus far, my feeling is they're really focusing on just trying to get the data and leaving the investigations to the IGs. In terms of who's being the most aggressive on those investigations, the SBA IG has been really aggressive looking at waste and fraud. I think there are well over 100 indictments at this point of PPP fraud. I think where they're likely to turn next is the EDL program. So that's the Economic Injury Disaster Loans. This was another SBA program that was similarly kind of lots of money went out the door very, very quickly. Didn't get as much press initially as PPP, but there's lots of opportunities for waste and fraud there. I think in some of our conversations with the IG, they know that that's likely to be a big area of investigation for them. There's also the Special Inspector General for Pandemic Relief, and that's so SIGPR, SIGPR, and this office was recently in the news. Some of you may have seen because they weren't getting the cooperation they wanted from agencies or from offices within Treasury rather, and they went to the OSC, the Office of Special Counsel, for an opinion on what their jurisdiction was and got a very bad opinion. And that has sort of reined them in to the point where the Office of Special Counsel just said, or sorry, no, not OSC, OLC, Office of Legal Counsel, said, you only have jurisdiction over this tiny sliver of programs within Treasury. And so this is sort of an ongoing debate, but SIGPER is supposed to be the other office tasked with looking at sort of waste and fraud issues around COVID spending. I think efforts are underway to try to reestablish that they have a broad mandate to do that. They've staffed up an office. They're starting to look at some of the things I mentioned to you guys. They're looking at the double dippers, and they're looking at some of the other indicators for fraud. But if they don't have jurisdiction, it's going to be hard for them to do much. There's also a congressional committee. I'm trying to remember what the acronym is. That was sort of inactive, but seems to be staffing back up. It is called the House Select Committee on Coronavirus Crisis, and it was pretty active really early on and then kind of died off and is now staffing back up. And then you mentioned the GAO, they've also been involved, though I'm not sure what they've been up to. I would also note that waste and fraud seem to be the major focus, even though I think there's a broad understanding that the equity of spending has also been a problem, but there hasn't been many offices stepping up there. That's something that we bring up when we meet with them as something we're really concerned about and something we're looking at and something we're trying to design tools to get at. But I have not, just to be candid, seen as much. I think it's because it's so much outside their standard set of skills. You know, they know how to investigate waste and fraud. I think they're finding it to be more difficult to get at the equity question, and they need to be pushed.
Okay, and how does this big picture, how does this compare with, you know, what happened after 2008, 2009, to the Congressional Oversight Panel, COP, and there was some other special IG group, and as well as congressional committees. Is the level of investigation similar, or are there enough warm bodies being thrown after these trillions of dollars to kind of see how well they're being used?
I mean, the scale of this is bigger, and the number of agencies involved is tremendous. The amount of money that went out very quickly without proper controls is just insane. So I mean, I think the challenges are bigger. I think they are making good headway, and I think they are probably appropriately staffed. As I mentioned, the IG has already, the Department of Justice has already issued something like 100+ indictments for PPP fraud. They continue to look at that. I think they feel prepared for the EDL fraud project. I think I should maybe couch that a little bit. Early going, the IGs alone were saying they were inundated, that there was more to investigate than they could. I think that's why it's important that an office like SIGPER, which is supposed to be providing additional bandwidth to deal with some of these issues, not have its jurisdiction constrained, which is what recently happened. And so you do have all of these bodies that have plenty to do. I think they have hired great teams to do that. The question is, you know, are the agencies cooperating, and are they being given the support and jurisdiction they need? And so that's where POGO right now is sort of putting our effort into making sure that they get the support they need from Congress and elsewhere to do the job. So I don't think it's, at this point, I don't think it's a lack of resources. I think it's a lack of cooperation from agencies that is hamstringing them, if anything.
Okay, Nick has a question. Nick, why don't you go ahead and ask that?
Hi, thanks for being here. I'm Nick Ruby with Honolulu Civil Beat. I guess I'd like you to sort of role play a little bit and be our assignment editor and sort of tell us what programs and areas you think we should be sort of investigating on our own. And obviously the PPP gets a lot of attention, but what are some of the other areas or programs that may not have as much money in them, but still has enough money that, you know, we should be paying attention to?
Sure. I think that's a great idea, and I'm happy to do that. So we've talked a little bit about the EDL program, but that's one where I mean, there seems to be wide recognition that there are big problems there. So EDL again is economic injury disaster loans. And if you just look up EIDL in the tracker, you'll find them. This is another program, huge scale between that and PPP. I mean, that's just a tremendous amount of money. These are grants, so they were never supposed to be paid back. So that makes them different from, or sorry, there's two kinds of EDLs, I should say. There are grants and then there are the loans, but the loans may also be converted into grants at the end of the day. And so again, there's a lot of money without a lot of oversight that went out directly from the government. So one of the big differences between EDL and PPP is there were lenders involved in PPP, whereas the EDL came right out of the government. So depending on what you think about the government's ability to administer millions and millions of loans, there's a real opportunity there. I think the challenge with these programs at the macro level is it's just too many transactions, but I think EDL makes for a great local story because you can really dive into how those loans have been distributed within a community or a state or a city. So EDL, I think, is a good one. I'll just mention a few others. There's a program called the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program that is a farm program. So that may be more relevant to some of you than others. I don't know if there's big problems there. And the reason I don't know is because the data has been withheld. And we've managed to get some through FOIA, but this is a big, ag assistance program that the recipients have not been made terribly public. And so we're working through it to sort of see where that money went. But this is another big program, not PPP size, but pretty big, that has not gotten any scrutiny because the recipients haven't even been made public. So that's another one. Someone before was asking about the state grants and sort of how that money has been distributed. I think the federal program is called the Coronavirus Relief Fund. But there's plenty to say about how the states then spent that money, which I think is a big story. And then the last one I'd mention is the Provider Relief Fund, which is the big hospital program. And again, this is one where the data challenges have made it difficult for us at the macro level to see what's going on, but there's I think real opportunities at the local level to look at this program, because what happened is big block grants went out from the federal government. They all flowed through a single recipient in Utah, this bank called Optum Bank, which then distributed the money. That data is available, but it's not something we've been able to match up on the macro level. And so I think looking at Provider Relief Fund data could also be an opportunity. Particularly, I mentioned our interest in the equity of spending. Those are hospital payments. What kinds of hospitals are they going to, and in what areas? I think could potentially be a really big story.
Okay, Nick, so there's your assignment. We'd like all those stories we'll give you a week. All right, hands up from Bridget.
Hi again. I was just curious if there's a way in your tracker to search for direct stimulus payments. I was just kind of clicking around and I wasn't sure if that was if you look for direct payments that are done through the Treasury, it pops up where it says the recipient was multiple recipients, and I wasn't sure if that's showing the direct stimulus payments, or just to have a sense of
Sure.
how much was paid out.
Yes, so that is a program where the government has not released data any lower than the state level,
Okay.
which is a problem. So we do have those payments in the system. I think I'm trying to remember what they would be under in programs, because they had a more technical name. Let me see if I know we've got it in the methodology what they're called technically. Economic impact payments. And so we have the state totals in there, but you're not going to be able to drill down any further than the state totals, which is a problem. I mean, you can understand from sort of a privacy perspective, you don't want to release individual names, but at the very least, we should have zip code level totals, which we currently don't. So there's a real data problem there.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, any final questions? Let me see, I got one more thing in the chat here. Let me check on this one. All right, we have a couple of reporters who are maybe gonna work together. That's great. Any final questions? All right, well, Brandon, you guys have built a great tool for reporters to use. I want to thank you very much for all the work that you at POGO and your colleagues did to make this, make these data available for the public and for reporters. And thanks for your time today.